And do we do the roll call first or do we do the first? Let's do the roll call first.
Supervisor Galloway?
Present.
Supervisor Andrews?
Present.
Supervisor O'Brien?
Here.
Mr. Smith? Supervisor Herring?
Here.
Ms. Wilkinson? Supervisor Barlow?
Yeah.
Supervisor Jones? Supervisor Reed?
Here.
Supervisor Rutherford?
Here.
Commissioner Duranzio?
Here.
Councilor Payne?
Here. And we do not have anyone that needs to be voted in for electronic participation. Right?
No.
All right, before we go to matters from the public, the agenda this evening, there will be a change to the agenda. So number 8, which is under business, we're going to remove that section this evening, and we will need to have a closed meeting tonight. So we will get through all of our other items and then finish the evening with a closed meeting. And with that, do we vote on the agenda? We've never voted on the agenda. How am I going to did that kick in my brain? Probably because there's a change to the so that will take us to number 2, matters from the public. Anyone here from the public who wishes to speak this evening? Anyone online who wishes to speak? Sean Tubbs making a visual appearance. Cameras on.
Which speaker was that? Hey, I got to leave my eyes shut.
Okay, great. There, so that will move us quickly to number 3. We have some clarifications this evening. The first one, the regional transit governance study draft report, Lucinda and is that Stephanie Amoni Yangston?
Yes. Yep. So last year I was before you presenting the regional transit vision plan, which presented some options for adding to transportation services in Region 10. And part of that plan, there were recommendations to do a governance study to identify new resources for transit and also how to manage them and plan regionally for public transportation. So we were lucky enough to get support from the City of Charlottesville, Albemarle County, and the Department of Rail and Public Transportation to conduct a regional transit governance study. We have Stephanie Yangston here from AACOM to share with you our findings for the report.
Thank you, Lucinda. And thank you all very much for this evening. Thank you for your time and giving us a chance to share with you the study that we've been working on for the past year. Now, this study has really been a way to investigate what options there are for the Charlottesville region. And so it's been a discovery process of what exists, what is possible, and what is allowed under the current legislation. And so for today, we have only about 10 minutes. And so my objective is just to give you a very high level overview. The draft report, I believe, has been provided to you all for review. And so thank you again, and I'll begin at this time. This project has been a collaboration between us, like Lucinda mentioned, and the TJPDC, as well as my colleagues also from AECOM. Now, this study really came about as a follow-up from the Transit Vision Plan that Lucinda mentioned. The origins of this study, however, since 2008, there have been efforts in the region to consider regional transit. Now, that effort led to the development of the establishment of the Regional Transit Partnership in 2017. After that, different studies have also looked at transit in the region, but from last year, the transit vision study was really monumental in the sense that it presented two different types of networks for that can be reviewed by the region in terms of the constrained and the unconstrained network. So this study was based on the assumption of going along with the constrained analysis, which has improved transit service in terms of number of days of service provision and the amount of service provided for both the rural and the urban networks. So moving along, the objective of this study really was twofold. First, to understand and identify potential ways in which regional transit can be governed, looking at the presented model from the transit vision study, and two, to identify those potential funding mechanisms to fund the increase in transit service. And so to do this study, we went about looking at four main ways. The first was to look at the existing conditions, which involved a lot of discussions and interviews with our providers, so John's Cat, and also talking with the university transit system. We also looked at, we did a peer analysis of regions across the United States that have similar characteristics to the Charlottesville area. And so we looked at regions that have a major university and also have that urban-rural characteristic as well. Following that, we investigated what are potential revenue streams to fund this increase in transit. We looked specifically at what options that are currently being used in Virginia, looking at the Hampton Roads example, Central Virginia with the CVTA, and Northern Virginia. And with further discussions with some stakeholders, we came down with a short list. And then finally, with more stakeholder engagement, we looked at potential governance options. So this study throughout the year, we've also done extensive engagement with stakeholders throughout the region. We've talked with both local and regional entities, from staff members as well as elected officials from the localities. We had engagement with members from DRPT, from VDOT, as well as some of the other transit authorities throughout the state that I mentioned before. And lastly, we also had the engagement with the other regional transit authorities across the country. And so we took all of this information and synthesized it, and we came up with several findings. And so this is just a way to summarize them all. The first thing we understood was that generally across both the urban areas and the rural areas, there is that general desire for improving transit, increasing investment in transit, and even looking at regional transit as an alternative. And so what we saw was that there is already some momentum from this study and also previous efforts. And so what we suggest is that this momentum is kept on with a sort of forming a work group made up of volunteers, a volunteer work group that can dive into some of the details for designing or coming up with the organizational documents required for such an authority. And so we suggested be a small committee to look at some of these issues, such as drafting bylaws and continuing to engage the different localities to make sure that everyone's voice is heard. We also want to make sure that we have agreements from the different stakeholders as you look at drafting these documents or finalizing them, so that it's developed in a way that everyone's voice is heard at this stage. Secondly, we identified a big need for a rural transit needs assessment. We saw that many of the localities in the in the rural areas still need to understand what kind of transit would best serve them, having an understanding of where the residents that need transit are located, what kind of transit would serve them, and even for different types of cross-boundary connections, maybe even outside of Region 10, considering maybe some neighboring counties to the some of these rural localities. And so further study into that would be beneficial in continuing these efforts for regional transit. Next, we also identify that just generally in speaking, and this is not uncommon, that there was a general sense of perceived value, or who would receive the most benefit from a regional arrangement and transit governance. There was this idea of not having your voices heard, or being localities that invest more into the system, but then have their input diluted. And so what we suggest is, as these efforts continue, to look at those rural needs assessments and feed that into the next steps of this study, including accountability mechanisms into how whatever funding is raised can be spent, making sure that there's equity in decision-making as well, to all the stakeholders that choose to be involved in the regional transit authority. And we also want to encourage continuing the educational efforts on the benefits on the regional approach and improving transit generally. Throughout the study, we had different discussions with representatives from UVA, but we think that there's more discussion and more engagement that needs to be done. And so for the next steps of the study, we hope to engage UVA on a deeper level and try to understand the ways in which we can collaborate and how they can be a partner in this regional approach. Now, from the peer studies we looked at, in each of those cases, we saw that the universities were a crucial member of their regional transit system. And so even regardless of what kind of governance structure they had. And so there was variety in the governance of the systems we looked at, from some being just simple city departments like CAT is, to independent authorities with taxing authority. We also saw one that was a public transportation corporation, similar to John's structure. And there was even a nonprofit. But in each of these circumstances, governance structures, the university played a crucial role in providing service for the region. The university is also in a position to work with a region to leverage potential grant funding that can be available to the region, whether it's at a state or federal level. It could position the region to receive more funding. Other mechanisms that can be looked at for cost sharing to exist. For example, in some of our discussions, what came up is a cross-training program for drivers from the UTS system to the localities. This is something that can be explored more, or sharing maintenance garages, or other types of administrative responsibilities. But as the next steps are taken, we really suggest that UVA be brought on as an important partner in these further discussions. Now, one of the main objectives of this study was to look at potential funding mechanisms for for increasing the local portion for transit investments. And so what you're looking at here is two lists that show the different revenue sources from the transportation authorities currently in the state of Virginia. And through discussions with the stakeholders at the state and local levels, we were able to come up with a short list of feasible options that you see to the right. And so what we did then was to come up with some potential estimates of how much each of these options could generate. And the details of those estimates are also provided in the draft report, which you have. Now, this is by no means the final list, is just a starting point for discussion. And so if there are other options to be looked at, we certainly encourage the region to continue this discussion on what everyone is comfortable with as well. And finally, in looking at the governance solution, we saw that there's a potential to have the interim step, like I mentioned before, of having a working group to discuss some details of what would work currently. But in the ideal solution that we are looking for is an authority that has power to do transit planning, as well as manage increased transit funding, however it's generated. And in this ideal solution, we based it off of the existing legislation. And so currently there's legislation that allows the City of Charlottesville and the County of Albemarle, along with the surrounding rural localities, to set up a transit authority if they wish to do so. However, it does not include a funding mechanism. And so this ideal solution is based off of the existing legislation with a few modifications to allow for added revenue, the revenue function. And so what you're looking at here is just a highlight of what that could look like in terms of representation and how it would start. And the governing body being made up of elected officials from the members of this authority that choose to join. Again, like I said in the beginning, this is really a starting point in the discussion of regional transit. And we are hoping that the region continues the momentum in this, going into the details and discussing how to move to the next steps. So what is next for this region? Now, this study is coming to an end at the end of this month. However, there are several things that can be done, details of which are outlined in the report. But we definitely want all the localities to review the final reports and have it as a point of discussion with their boards and their localities. And then setting up that working group that was discussed before, a small working group that can keep the momentum in the efforts to set up this transit authority. Now, thank you very much. This is the end of our time, but I can take any questions you may have.
Thank you. Any questions or comments?
I would like to add that this report is long, and I don't anticipate everybody had time to read it. We do not have a meeting in January, but we will come back to this in February. And what we'll be asking from you all is really action related to, would you like PDC staff to continue allocating resources and time into moving this initiative forward and accepting the draft report as a final report? So it's really going to be seeking your guidance on, do we want to continue moving along with this and seeking resources and doing convenings around the transit board.
Any questions or comments?
In terms of timing, does that affect our ability to go and get enabling legislation to make changes in that?
By waiting until February?
Yeah.
No, because we already have resources allocated for this fiscal year to just keep working.
Okay.
It's just whether or not you guys continue to see this as a priority action that we should be working towards.
I think one question might be with sort of the speed at which we proceeded. We were looking to establish, to use Title 33, Chapter 28, which is the existing legislation, which is sort of an abandoned redheaded stepchild, from what I can tell. But, you know, I think the consultants made the not so subtle argument that, well, you could start with brand new legislation and try to stand that up and include money, or you could try to slip in, you know, make yet another attempt to slip in some money. And the question is, at the pace at which we proceed, could we be in a position by towards the end of next year to be doing that dance with the legislature?
What's the next calendar year?
Yeah.
Yes. That is our hope that would be the timeline. And it would require, you know, it to actually stand up the existing authority would require action at the governing bodies of the localities. But one of the recommendations coming out of this study is almost a working group to keep things moving forward. Let's look at bylaws. Let's look at what the language might be so that we continue with the momentum while, you know.
And I was thinking about in terms of the strategy, I guess, is that to push towards making this thing happen and then go hunting for the money for it, which would be, I mean, it's a little stronger position to take. We're standing here, you know, wearing barrels, looking for a little money to make this happen. Oh, House of Delegates, help us out.
So one of the things that the study says is that some of the rural counties have to do a better assessment of the needs that they actually have for transit and the linkages and how something like this would be able to serve them. John's hosting a rural transit needs assessment study on December 12th. I'm wondering how that links into this. Is it up to us or someone to include that into the momentum here to keep it going, or is there any linkage directly between that and this?
We know that they're conducting that study that was in parallel with all these conversations where folks were saying the idea of this is great. We're not sure we yet know in our county if there were more transit, would folks use it? You know, where is the demand? How are we demonstrating with quantitative data where the demand is? And so we know John is currently working on the study, and we have a staff member that's actually sitting on the steering committee.
That was my question, to make sure that there's someone there that can make sure that this doesn't get lost.
Yep. Yep. Thank you for asking that.
Other questions or comments? Okay. Thank you, Ms. Voting-Yancey.
Thank you for your time.
And I'll also add, sorry to interrupt, we have already come before City Council, we've already come before Albemarle County and Fluvanna County. We have already scheduled for the other three to coming before your governing boards to give a similar presentation. So you can also ask questions then.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Stephanie.
All right, we will move to the presentations, Watershed Improvement Program update. So Brian. Good evening.
Good evening.
Hello, I hope everybody's doing well this evening. I am Isabella O'Brien of Planner 1 with the TJPDC. A large part of what I do with the TJPDC is manage the Chesapeake Bay PDC Locality Implementation Program, or WIP for short, because it's a bit of a mouthful. And as a high-level overview, the goal of WIP is to support meeting the goals of the TMDL, which is a total daily maximum load set in place by EPA to set a pollution diet for nitrogen, phosphorus, and sediment, and the amounts that can reach our local streams and eventually the Chesapeake Bay and still meet water quality standards for drinking water, recreation, fishing, and a lot of other uses. So as a little bit more background, after decades of restoration efforts were sparked by the Clean Water Act and the Chesapeake Bay Agreement of 1983, the Chesapeake Bay was still suffering from water quality impairments like nutrient and bacteria pollution from agriculture, sewer treatment plants and urbanized areas, and sediment pollution from agricultural land and construction sites. And this was leading to harmful algal blooms, smothering aquatic life, destroying valuable habitat, and harming the economy for the region. So in response, the TMDL was the federal strategy that was developed to accelerate restoration efforts and hold all jurisdictions within the Bay accountable to those pollution reduction goals. So watershed implementation plans were developed for each state within the Bay that outlined the specific actions for each jurisdiction that they would take to achieve those pollution reduction goals. And it's a culmination of legal obligations from the Clean Water Act, the Chesapeake Bay Agreement, also the federal commitment from EPA, jurisdictional requests, and the need for a coordinated approach to address the pollution across the watershed. And the efforts of PDCs across the watershed and in Virginia is included in WIP and the 2-year milestones that are set in place by DEQ. So very recently, DEQ has developed their draft milestones for the next 2 years, and they're available online for public comment if you're interested to learn a little bit more about what those programmatic and numeric milestones are for WIP, keeping in mind that the TMDL and that pollution reduction diet is to be met by the end of 2025. We're currently not slated to meet all of those goals, although a lot of progress has been made. And some of the numeric milestones look like increasing tree plantings, forest buffers along streams, increasing livestock stream exclusion in agricultural areas. And then as part of those programmatic milestones, the way that PDCs are involved is we'll be sharing information about environmental justice with the localities, and then working to engage our state and local partners to increase BMP implementation, which are the practices that help us meet those pollution reductions. So tree plantings, the livestock stream exclusions, et cetera. So diving in a little bit deeper to our specific program and the programs within all PDCs in Virginia, there's $58,000 allocated from DEQ alongside local match. And historically, we've provided regional leadership related to the plan, technical support, and administrative assistance for implementation. We also hold discussions and continue relationships and continue the momentum of the programmatic milestones as part of WIP. But most recently, we are working to transition into greater implementation through the directive of DEQ. And what's important to note here is the PDC program focuses on non-MS4 areas, which is really the rural areas. Because urban areas, what MS4 stands for, I think, is municipals, storm sewer separate system, which I might have mixed up a few S's there. It's basically the drainage pipes that are in those urbanized areas that collects water from hard surfaces like streets and roofs and takes it directly to our streams without any treatment. And because there's no treatment there and they can point to the source of where the pollution is coming from, there's more regulation involved in the urbanized areas, more funding, and more staff. So we're in place to help fill the gaps that exist in those rural non-MS4 areas. So as I mentioned, DEQ and EPA is hoping for PDCs to move towards greater implementation. And I hope that you now kind of have a better handle on the federal and state guidance that's informing our program. But some new funding became available to PDCs this year to help support that transition through the IIJA. And so 8 of the 15 PDCs within the Chesapeake Bay watershed in Virginia received additional funding for shovel-ready BMP projects at almost $2 million. And we have received an update from DEQ that EPA plans to make this funding available to us for the next 3 years. The exact amount isn't slated until we get the update each year from EPA, but we can expect future funding to support implementation. So this is a high-level overview of the scope for this year, with our deliverables on the left column and then some of our accomplishments for each deliverable on the other side. And you can see here that some of our deliverables did include that continued coordination and outreach and education, while others are transitioning more towards implementation and identifying opportunities to support our partners in that. So I'm going to go into a little bit more detail about the highlighted deliverables to just share some of the information that's been developed for the public and as well for you all this year. So that first deliverable was to document and analyze partners that can support implementation of BMPs and other green infrastructure techniques. So we first collected BMP contractor lists from our partners at the Soil and Water Conservation Districts, as well from BDH. But the larger aspect of what we've been doing for this deliverable is known as the Stewardship Mapping and Assessment Project, which we partnered with the U.S. Forest Service to complete. And StewMap for short has been carried out in over 15 different regions and cities across the globe. But basically, the StewMap is a process for collecting data on environmental stewards within any area to better understand who those environmental groups are, where they work, the type of work that they do, and who they collaborate with. It starts with a survey to the environmental groups, and based on the information that they share, we're able to map and develop a database that will be publicly available. We completed the survey to over 140 local environmental groups and had over a 30% response rate. And we're working currently on the data visualization phase, and we'll have public data available later this winter. And to kind of show you what the data results are going to look like, this is known as the StewMap dashboard. This is in New York, but each orange dot represents an office location of a different environmental group. And then each blue highlighted area represents a stewardship turf, or where each environmental group is carrying out their environmental work. And this helps us to identify gaps in where certain types of environmental stewardship are occurring and are not occurring. And then when you click on either a turf or a specific office location on the map, it will pop up the box, which includes the information that that environmental group shared through their survey. And this can support partnership building of other environmental groups in similar sectors, again, help to identify those gaps and where we aren't meeting certain needs, and really just provide a all-encompassing database for the public as well as local stakeholders to explore who the environmental stewards are in their region. Another aspect of what we completed this year was developing a green infrastructure toolkit for local leaders, including elected officials, as well as planning staff and environmental staff. But this is packed with resources to deepen your understanding of WIP, green infrastructure, and resilience in general. The training resources that are provided in that second section were developed by local leaders for local leaders to better understand their role in restoring the Chesapeake Bay. In the land instruments and green infrastructure section, we share information that includes planning and regulatory tools that promote resilience and support the goals of the WIP. You can also learn more about environmental justice, local related planning initiatives like the TJPDC Green Infrastructure Study, and local water quality data and indicators. That is available on our website and linked here. We'll share the PowerPoint so that you all can take a look. We developed a separate toolkit. As part of our work this year, we had partner meetings with local staff in the non-MS4 areas to identify pipeline projects and opportunities for implementation and hear about their goals for the program. And we received feedback that there was a lot of interest from the community in learning more about opportunities for conservation on their properties and the many funding opportunities that are available to help them implement BMPs, and sometimes will cover 100% of the cost. So in response to this feedback, we developed a toolkit for homeowners to learn about the small scale residential BMP projects, and each different BMP that's presented is associated with at least one grant opportunity available to homeowners or homeowners associations. And to help share this information and other pertinent information with the public, we are in the process of developing a public outreach, education, and participation plan that will be shared with regional staff. And this will include at least 4 social media or newsletter posts per month, print materials to be shared at public locations like libraries or county office buildings. It will also provide current updates on engagement opportunities for the public, such as rain barrel workshops, which is a common residential BMP. And by providing additional materials, continuing our regional coordination, and carrying out the 2024 scope of work seen here, we hope to continue to increase capacity towards BMP implementation in the region. You can see our scope here is a little bit smaller than years past, and that was purposeful with the DEQ to allow more resources to identify implementation opportunities. But we'll continue our outreach and education efforts, continue participating in local watershed meetings, continue to share environmental justice. Part of our implementation for next year will be collecting information from the septic repairs, replacements, and pump out projects that occur throughout our housing programs, and making sure that the eligible projects there are entered into the BMP warehouse, which models reduction towards the Chesapeake Bay by inputting those BMPs. Hopefully that's not too technical. And then we're also going to continue to share information about the stewardship mapping and assessment project. Once we have the database available, we'll have a public meeting to share that information, first with our stakeholders and then with the rest of the public. Yeah, and we look forward to continuing to work with you all and your staff to identify additional BMP opportunities. So please let me know if you have any questions.
Questions or comments?
In the executive director's report that is in your packet are links to live links to all of the resources that she discussed. Do you want to look at them in further detail?
So the map that one of the orange dots.
So that we're in the process of going into the data visualization phase. This is an example from New York, but all of the databases developed in all different parts of the world have a similar structure. We might use a few different colors, but it will be similar. Yes. There will be downloadable data so that people can create their own maps if they'd like. We'll also have a network map that shows how organizations receive funding, who they receive their knowledge and information from, and then just the general organizations that they collaborate with. And then we'll have the public database and map.
Give us some regional examples
Of BMP funding opportunities. Yeah, so a few other planning district commissions have already received the additional implementation funding, and some of their projects look like developing septic pump out programs regionally. Another is promoting the Virginia Conservation Assistance Program, which is available through the soil and water conservation districts. And it's a program that is available for landowners, homeowners, the public, as well as local governments to implement the small scale BMPs. And they're partnering with their local jurisdictions to do a pilot project at a public site, like a local park or library, to display what a residential BMP could look like. Oftentimes they're very beautiful. They just look like gardens or tree plantings, things along those lines. And then sometimes there'll be like an informational plaque to share a little bit more information, but yeah, those riparian buffer plantings are also a big one.
A county could apply
put an example of this in one of their parks, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, through the Virginia Conservation Assistance Program, yeah.
You know, Isabel's done a lot of really great work on this, but I want to particularly call out the resources for homeowners. A lot of these resources are available directly to homeowners and landowners, and a lot of folks are not aware of them. And so the toolkit that you put together, this resource, is really an incredible comprehensive list. And so that'll be communicated through your staffs, but also through working with your communications departments to help your constituents learn about all of these resources that they can access directly. So I just want to say kudos to you for the work that went into that. Thanks.
Yeah. Great.
Thank you very much. Dave, legislative updates.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, just a few highlights, I guess, at the County General Assembly session. This will be the long session, 60 days, beginning on January 10th. There we go. Background, please. Well, now it's go ahead. So 60 days, finished up the first part of March. Probably the most significant thing heading into the session is there's going to be so many new faces among the legislators. Really was historic turnover with a lot of longtime legislators, as we talked about before, that retired or were not voted back. Members of the House that ran for the Senate, but over 50 new members out of 140 total. When the dust settled after the November elections, very, very slim margins for the Democrats in both the House and the Senate. Senate actually retained its Democratic majority. They had been 22 to 18, so they lost a seat to 21-19. The House had been 52 to 48 Republicans, so it was a flip of 3 seats there. So all that means, in the House, you have new leadership. You'll see new committee chairs. I think just talking to some folks here recently, was trying to look down the list. We think it's possible that you could have freshman delegates be chairs of subcommittees in the House, not outside of the possibility. With the change in leadership in the House as well, there could be changes in the rules and how they operate. There will be some bill introduction limits. Again, this session, I think it's 25 in the Senate. It's probably 15 in the House. New delegates were encouraged to go even below that. So we'll see how that goes. Next slide, please. Probably the other most significant thing in the coming session will be the budget. Now, if you think seems like we just did a budget at the state level, we did. Because the budget was approved in September for the current fiscal year. But in less than 2 weeks, the governor will introduce both amendments to the current fiscal year 24 state budget, as well as his proposal for fiscal year 25 and 26, which is like his most significant budget, any governor's most significant budget in the middle of their term, because it's the one that they get to introduce and then basically see through for most of its time. We've had some pretty good years the past several years with the state budget. Budgeting was very conservative with the uncertainty about the economy and where things were heading during the pandemic. Plus, we had the infusion of a whole lot of federal money. So we're going to be returning to normal, and when I say normal, 1-3% growth in revenue for fiscal year 25 and 26. That last bullet I put up there is something I always like to say because I hear a lot from the legislators, and that is the governor proposes and the General Assembly disposes. So the governor will submit his budget. By the time we get to the end of the first week of the session, members of the House and Senate will have had an opportunity to introduce budget amendments to make changes to his proposal. And particularly with the Republican governor, Democrats in charge of the House and Senate, probably going to be some pretty significant differences in what you see on December 20th versus what you see the middle of February. That being said, People don't really, you hear so much about where the differences are in the budget, but quite frankly, I would say probably 85% of what's in a budget that's introduced stays in the budget. So if folks trying to get something in the budget, much better to have it in the introduced budget than trying to get the budget. So a little bit deeper dive on the state budget. There's some structural balance issues, I think, heading in terms of that balance of revenues and expected expenditures. Again, there's going to be some challenges with the ongoing revenues being sufficient to meet the expenses of the General Assembly, wants to pay for. Anticipating there will be enough to pay for required mandatory spending, and maybe you think about Medicaid, you think about K-12 education. But high priority items, probably not too much left after that. You can see there a couple of weeks ago, I guess the middle of November, the staffs for both the House Appropriations and Senate Finance committees had their annual budget retreats. And this is just kind of the range of estimates of revenue growth for 25 and 26 that the staffs were recommending. So there you can see, for 25, basically a 1 to 3, and then in the threes for fiscal year 26. Budget pressures, agencies throughout the fall, they submit their request for expenditures through the process, through their secretariat, part of the planning budget, makes its way up to the governor. There were $3.7 billion requested for fiscal year 25 and 26. And about the time that those came in, it seemed like that the news then came out that the agencies were then being asked to show where they could pull back about 10% because of what was anticipated to be a pretty tight budget. Again, those budget pressures, those budget drivers, as they're called, Medicaid, probably another $700 billion in state funding is going to be needed over the next biennium. K-12, this is a re-benchmarking year when the costs for K-12 state and local are re-benchmarked, reapportioned, so to speak. And there's right now there's a kind of a wide range as well between what the administration, what the House and what the Senate are expecting in terms of what it will take to update the cost of K-12 education. So I think that's going to be a really interesting one. Then of course, demands with human services, behavioral health, public safety, and pay rate is all what we in mind, I think, for legislators. And then that's all against the backdrop of what's going to be happening in our work, in our state, with the economy, with job growth, with what the economy is going to be a slowdown, and of course you add in global events, geopolitics. Those are all kind of the cautionary things I think that are on the minds of the appropriators as they go through the budget process. All right, real quickly, just a few legislative items. Not anything really specific that I wanted to get into, but just again with being in the middle of the governor's term, there'll certainly be some initiatives that will be coming out of the executive branch. I think we'll see the Democrats approving some signature legislation. You've already seen a couple of bills and resolutions out there. We're talking minimum wage, we're talking constitutional amendment on abortion, we're talking some firearms things. Things that probably will stand a pretty good chance of getting through a democratically controlled legislature, and then we'll see once they hit the governor's desk. That being said, I think that if there's going to be any needles moved on any major initiatives, certainly there's going to have to be compromise, there's going to have to be agreement between the legislative branch and the executive branch. Local governments, we play a lot of defense. Talk to folks, this fall as we did the legislative approval process with their local governing bodies, particularly in the land use area. It just seems like we just spend so much time having to try to get things killed. So don't expect that to be any different, even though we have new members. And then I just highlighted a couple of local initiatives that I think the majority of folks are familiar with. First being the 1 cent sales tax for school facilities. That is an initiative that has been out there for several years. There's a group of 9 localities that have the authority. There's been some attempts to add different localities to the existing authority. There's been some statewide legislation. There will probably be multiple bills, but the House and the Senate side, localities, statewide bills, Republicans, Democrats. Was in a meeting early this afternoon with the Albemarle board, and Senator Deeds will be carrying one of those bills, and Delegate-elect Carlson will be carrying one as well. But Senator Deeds said that he expects that once the sales tax bill, again authorizing localities to do it if it's approved in a voter referendum, would probably pass the General Assembly. And then, of course, we have to go to the governor for his approval as well. And then the only other one that I wanted to mention, our folks from Nelson County are here, have done a great job, I think, in the past 6 months advocating for a change in state law that would allow officers employed by private police departments to be eligible for line of duty benefits. And we're expecting legislation to be introduced and hopefully make its way through the General Assembly on that as well. And I think that may be it. Can I answer any questions?
Yeah, David, I know we're still waiting for the draft to come out. You haven't seen it yet, have you?
I have none.
As soon as you see that.
Well, yeah. I mean, last week had a conversation. I'm just gonna probably try to lump both the college campuses piece and this piece.
Right.
Yeah, certainly will let you know. And I guess just, Mr. Chairman, just as a reminder, as we head into the session, I have points of contact in each of your localities, on legislation when I'm looking for feedback or something comes up, there's a question from a legislator. But then also, begin to look for legislative updates coming out on a more regular basis, in addition to probably some email communications with your staff. The budget comes out on December 20th. I'm hoping to have by Friday the 22nd. This is the latest I can remember this budget coming out. Have kind of a high level view of what the major things are. So, and there'll be additional analysis that will come out after that. But, so good holiday view.
For the two local sales tax, were they both going to be statewide? That they were going to be?
Yes.
I was not.
Yes. Yes.
As long as the newbies can get it done.
Great. The JLARC study of the composite index and school funding. Have you seen any the initiative and the momentum from that study? Do you see that turning into something else? I mean, just got hit with a 13% increase in our composite index.
Yeah,
we're
yeah.
now 2/3.
Yeah, there were like across the region of 6 jurisdictions. I think 3 of you went up. A couple of them pretty significantly. Actually, I think the 3 that went up were all pretty significant. The 3 that went down were not significant declines. But I think that the General Assembly will probably tread somewhat lightly in trying to move, take too big of a step. Because I think they're probably going to move in the direction of setting up their own group to take a deeper dive on what those recommendations are. But just as an example, of course, that report came out in July. We did the budget in September. There was some additional money in the September budget for those support positions and trying to move towards eliminating that cap, which I think is implied or maybe even set out in the JLARC report as one of the things that need to be addressed. So there may be continue to be some focus on things like that, but I think in terms of any kind of a broader comprehensive overhaul, if they're going to try to mess with the funding formula, that's certainly going to come.
Any other questions? Thank you, David. Okay, we'll move to number 4, consent agenda. Let's go through these item by item. The minutes of the November 2nd Finance Executive Committee meeting, and then the minutes of the November 2nd meeting. All the abstentions, there won't be folks in the executive committee meeting, so everybody can vote on those. Is there a motion to approve the minutes of the November 2nd, 23 Finance Executive Committee? So moved. Second? Second? I'll second. I guess if I really want to have to say it. Then I guess just Tony and I are voting.
Only one's present. Everybody else would have seen.
What the hell is this? This is interesting.
Yeah.
Aye. Everybody else abstained. All right, the minutes of the November 2nd, 23 meeting, that's the whole commission meeting. Any edits or changes to those, to that set of minutes? No?
I'm going to approve.
Second. All right, and all in favor, say aye. Opposed? Abstentions? There we go.
I did have a life lesson once on voting on minutes. And I had this guy tell me, he said, it's actually, yes, because we had an issue because you never had a quorum to vote on the minutes because we were ending the year too. We were changing, this is a for-profit world, right? And we learned, it actually is this now, of course, maybe it's different in government and the entities that we work with. Maybe best practices to abstain if you weren't there, just for transparency purposes. However, you can vote yes on it and say yes, the minutes are good enough for the sake of the record. For the sake of the record, I've just my life lesson. I heard this twice. Whether it's true or not, one can't be a lawyer, the other didn't. I'm not a lawyer, but I've taken one for the team many times. So.
Well, technically speaking, the finance executive committee meeting, then it should be approved in the next finance executive committee.
It'll be a year from now.
Because in our other committees, they to approve at the next meeting, so that's why I'm looking.
Well, that's
Want to be able to watch it.
You can cross track.
Yeah, we could.
there's a lot of art.
I mean, in other words, we can track every year. All right, new business number. Wait, October financial reports. Christine, any comments there before we?
Yes, October was a very, very strong month. We had a net gain of just at 54,000. We have 9 months of operating expenses on hand. Just under 2 of those are unrestricted. From the accrued revenue report, you can see that we have ample funds to be able to cover all of the projected expenses throughout the year. We have about 182,000 on average a month, and our 12-month average is 136,000. So we anticipate having more than enough to get through the year, with the likelihood that some of it will roll into the next fiscal year for any programs that cross fiscal years. That's all.
Sure. If you have questions, is there a motion to accept the October financial?
So moved. Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye. Opposed? Abstentions? Great. So we'll go to number 5, new business, and the first item, we have an appointment to the Regional Housing Partnership.
Yes, we actually have 2 new appointments to the Regional Housing Partnership. The first is replacing Anthony Harrow's appointment as the appointed nonprofit housing representative. We have a recommendation to appoint Shayla Washington, who is the new executive director of BRAC. And then the second appointment is replacing Taylor Frum, who was the appointed citizen resident representative from an urban area. And we are recommending Emily Dreyfus, who is the interim executive director of FAR. And Emily has been serving in the role of Taylor Frum's alternate.
Thank you. Is there a motion to approve? So moved. All right, moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? We'll take this to the calendar year 2024 calendar meetings. Christine?
Put a draft before you of the purpose of it was just to set the dates and times for the meetings in calendar year 2024. It also includes a draft of topics subject to change based on the timeliness. If you all approve this calendar, then after January, once any new commissioners are put into place, I'll send out calendar invites for the entire year to populate your calendars for you. We do not meet in January or July. So it's a calendar to include all of the other months.
Great. there a motion to approve the calendar year 24 calendar of meetings?
So moved.
Second. And motion made and seconded. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? The calendar is approved. Very good. No old business, so we can go right to number 7, the executive director's report.
Okay. The first one I'd like to do, and I'd like to do it informally now and request doing it formally later, but I want to make sure to thank Dale. Dale, this is your last meeting as a TJPDC commissioner. I'd like, since Andrea is also, this is her last night, but she wasn't able to be here. I'd like to invite both of you guys to come back to a meeting just to be formally recognized, if you're willing, in the beginning of the calendar year. But I want to make sure to thank Dale, not only for his leadership and his service on the TJPDC, but also for his mentorship through my tenure. I really appreciate all that he's given of his time, of his resources, of his energy, of his wisdom to help through the executive director transition. So I really want to thank you, but also invite you later to do more of a celebration of the service that you gave us.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
Get to eat all the gingerbread.
Second administrative item is this year we participate in our annual gingerbread contest. Again, staff did, so you'll see them lined up over there. We would love, just to keep the fun in the season, if you guys, before you leave, would vote. There is ballots over there for 3 different categories. We just really enjoyed making fun of this during the season. So if you'll turn in your ballots before you leave. Next one is staff were able to go to the Virginia Association of Counties, so many of you guys there, as well as the Governor's Housing Conference since the last time we met. Body 22 gave you the monthly update of all of the details, but also wanted to remind you guys that Body 2024 applications are due December 19th. So we're working in close partnership with Firefly to prepare that application. You've seen Firefly come before many of your boards asking for support for the application. Several transportation updates detailed in the agenda. I'm not going to go the director's report. I'm not going to go through those. An update to the housing Virginia eviction reduction pilot. We submitted an application to continue the program into calendar year 2024. We were notified this week that we were awarded. So that's $326,550 to continue the eviction reduction efforts that are going on. And then regional housing partnership, you may, we're not going to do roundtable, but the regional housing partnership helped facilitate, or not really facilitate, helped organize the joint session between Albemarle Board of Supervisors and Planning Commission in helping get attendees to participate in that work session. You can say more about that later if you'd like, but I wanted to mention that was of news. I think that's all I have.
Great, thank you. Yeah. Well, before we go into the closed meeting, and since we are unexpectedly not having the roundtable, I would certainly like to afford you the opportunity to do your portion of the roundtable. What's your last week?
Well, first I'd like to thank everybody for their past 8 years. My wife is here with me tonight from our last meeting, and glad she's here because she heard me say, when I decided to run again, her and I had a conversation. Let you know, Rick Randolph came to me at a housing meeting at the Omni and wanted me to chair or run to chair this organization. And I was debating whether or not to run again. And I ran for office again because I wanted to be part of this organization, to be the chair of this organization. And her and I had a conversation, and she was supportive, but she was also very adamant if you don't run again. And I want you here tonight. All that finals, but thank you guys for everything that you've done. Everything you've done for our community and our county. A lot has been accomplished in Greene County because of your efforts. I am hopeful that the new board will see the value of TJPDC. I have some doubts that will happen, but I hope that they will see the value. I know the previous board members before I came on board all those doubts, but it's been a great asset to our community. Each of you work very hard, and this is an organization where I come to, and I feel like I can hear your viewpoints, learn from you, and it's an intelligent conversation, and the critical comments are valuable. It's not like a normal board meeting. And both of you understand this, but thank you very much for allowing me to be part of this conversation. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Well, I know there are members here who have served with you for many of those years. I would welcome the opportunity for you guys to say a few words if you'd like.
I will say this, there's no person I've found better camaraderie, of course, with many of you, but especially over COVID than Mr. Herring. At that time, in the delicate time where we're trying to meander the many questions that we've all had, I think there were many days. And I mean, I can also say some of the PDC staff know that I call a lot. But Dale and I had a lot of great conversations about how to conduct ourselves, and I've always looked at Dale in many different ways as to how to conduct myself. And I know. I don't know. May not have worked. Got some really good advice though. But seriously, I think that there's one thing of value that I can attribute is that in my, kind of young life and looking to some level of mentorship, you've been that to me. And when we had hard questions in our county and certain issues, I always had no problem calling Mr. He's always been a mentor and saying, and quite a few times he called me stupid. It was good. It was good. Oh. And but it challenged me in a lot of ways. And of course, when there were moments where I was challenging myself, that he either, gave me good cautionary advice or said, man, your head's in the right spot. And those are good things to have at any point. And another attribute of the PDC to orchestrate those relationships across county lines. So I appreciate our camaraderie over the last 7 years, 6 years, however many years it's been.
Seems like 7.
It's been a long time.
I echo a lot of what Mr. Rutherford said, and just appreciate your quiet sort of style of leadership and your demeanor and kind of looking at the big picture. And, like you said, we all work hard to bring our towns forward, and I think collaboratively we do so. And you've always been a key part of the collaborative process here. So we're going to miss you for sure. We appreciate that. Thank you.
You were the chair when I came onto the TJPDC. What I'm hearing from both Tony and Jesse, I concur with your not just even keel nature and even handedness, but the way you ran the meeting, the way you helped transition your members on is always appreciated. So I think we all also appreciate your strides to help Greene County see the value in the TJPDC. And we may have to shoulder that responsibility moving forward. But appreciate your efforts on that front for sure over the last several years.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Could always be a point in the city. Is this true?
I'm not sure that would help.
Well, thank you again, Mr. Herring, and you get to finish off with a wonderful closed meeting. You get one more closed meeting. Any other comments that you'd like to make?
I mean, Andrea, we can't go without.
Oh, yeah, we'll bring her back.
I mean, please, if you're like the founder of this whole thing that I got on here, I mean, that it is kind of strange to kind of say that there's only been a few of us on here now who's stretched 7 years. Tommy over here is being like, and Keith were some of the last of the beginning of that new transition, and Andrea's knowledge of finance and her ability to bring that to the table in the hard conversations, is a huge asset, and is a big reason why this commission still exists. It's funny that Greene might be going the other way, but Greene is partially responsible for it continuing to exist. So, but yeah, I think that whenever it came to the treasury reports and finance things, or in my little bit of participation in that, I didn't have any questions when Andrea had no problem.
Institutional knowledge is certainly important.
Yes.
I agree. I think I've been on this commission 10 years now. It's yeah, the knowledge gets passed on. I remember those days, those really hard days with the commission.
And I will say for Andrea that she's really enjoyed being part of the commission. She had talked to me, I think it was 2 days ago. And, resigning was something not easy for her to do. But in her point in her life was something that she felt she needed to do. So she wanted to express that to everybody, and thank everybody for all their support for the years, many years. She was on this committee. Was Keith there longer?
I think she's long.
Yeah, she served as chair. She was the chair saying that the vice chair would never have to chair a meeting. But the first meeting that she had, Tony had to. She wanted to express her gratitude to the privilege.
Well, it will definitely have, hopefully she will be available so that we can have both of you back.
Problem is that we have Joe's reputation, didn't have few words.
Y'all said all the day, biggest act would have been a common sense, get out of the nice, calm way to manage doing stuff, and Andrew as well. Her accounting background certainly made it easy when we were doing decisions in here with the, especially on the financials and stuff like that. She caught an awful lot of stuff that most of them didn't think about. But, you know, we've both got a great asset to this TJPDC and won't be so.
Thank you, Supervisor Barlow. All right, Commission, I'm going to make the motion here. I move that the Commission be convened to a closed session pursuant to the exemption found in section 2.25711A, 1 of the Code of Virginia to discuss a personnel matter involving discipline of an employee.
Do you want me to make that motion?
I just made the motion.
I will second.
We have an amended motion that I
Did not give it.
did not give to the chair.
Oh, we have the amended motion over here.
Go. I'm going to take my motion back.
All right. I do hear a move of the commission be convened in closed session pursuant to exemption found in section 2.2-371A1 of the Code of Virginia to discuss a personnel matter involving discipline of an employee, and pursuant to the exemption found in section 2.2-3711A19, the Code of Virginia to discuss a security issue related to the TJPDC office.
Thank you.
All right, we'll do a roll call vote, please. Roll call.
Supervisor Galloway,
Yes.
Supervisor Andrews,
Yes.
Supervisor O'Brien,
Yes.
Mr. Smith, Supervisor Heron, Supervisor Barlow,
Yes.
Supervisor Jones, Supervisor Reed,
Yes.
Supervisor Rutherford,
Yes.
Commissioner Duranzio,
Yes.
Councilor Payne.
Yes.
We are in the video stay here, correct?
We're going to stop recording. We're going to remove.
Session.
Second.
All right, if you will call the roll.
Supervisor Galloway,
Yes.
Supervisor Andrews,
Yes.
Supervisor O'Brien,
Yes.
Supervisor Heron,
Yes.
Supervisor Barlow,
Yes.
Supervisor Reed,
Yes.
Supervisor Rutherford,
Yeah.
Commissioner Duranzio,
Yes.
Councilor Payne.
Yes.
Motion carries, thank you. And then I need a motion to certify.
Do I hear a move the commission certified that the best of each member's knowledge on public business matter lawfully exempted from the open meeting requirements of the Virginia Freedom of Information Act, and identified the motion authorizing the closed session were heard, discussed, or considered in a closed session.
Second.
You'll call the roll, please.
Supervisor Galloway,
Yes.
Supervisor Andrews,
Yes.
Supervisor O'Brien,
Yes.
Supervisor Heron,
Yes.
Supervisor Barlow,
Yes.
Supervisor Reed,
Yes.
Supervisor Rutherford,
Yes.
Commissioner Duranzio,
Yes.
Councilor Payne.
Yes.
And that motion carries, thank you. There are no motions coming out of closed meeting. And I would say the commission's pleasure. We do have some time on the agenda. The original roundtable was scheduled to go until 8:45. Would any members like to do a roundtable participation? not going to force the matter, but if you all want to do a quick roundtable, we do it.
I have a lot to say. Don't make it go for it.
Well, then I'll start on this side. Supervisor Andrews, you want to do a quick roundtable?
Let's see. What let's talk about housing, affordable housing incentives. We had our legislative session today with Saturdays and Delegate White's law firm also. It's been a busy week, but I don't know, there's a lot that we had a very long session with our schools to talk about the 5-year capital improvement plan. And, the needs are great. And there'll be a lot to look at in the coming budget season. So.
And we took a hit on the positive impact as well. It's part of our joint strategic or 5-year financial plan, so that was big. This past Monday, we met out at Northport. It was the Albemarle County Board of Supervisors, the Planning Commission. But then I think there were 8 representatives.
We invited 10.
So there were 10, and there were there 10?
I think they all showed.
So between the Regional Housing Partnership and then others who are in the development community, both for-profit and not-for-profit, was a conversation around developer incentives in Albemarle County and trying to arrive at a conclusion of what we're actually going to do. It was a nice, open, frank conversation between developers, planning commissioners, and supervisors. And we left that meeting with a consensus that tax abatements for the longevity of the time frame you're looking for the affordability. Previously, we had the 10, but if you do 30 years of affordability, then you can do a tax abatement program that should match that 30 years. And predictability was the other item the developers chalked up as their first. So that will go to our planning commission for a final review and then come to our board for sign off, not to the exclusion of other incentives, but as the primary incentive to help with affordability specific for rentals. And then there was a brief conversation about an opening of the door to the conversation of the county acquiring land specifically for affordable housing purposes. And if we start to do that. So that's a conversation I suspect will come back. Not that that was tied directly to developer incentives, but is the biggest impediment to home ownership is the cost of land. So the county buying the land and then providing that for housing could be something that helps get home ownership handled. But that was a good conversation, and hopefully by February maybe we finally put the cap on that conversation. But Councilor Payne?
100 speakers. 100 speakers, which was a lot less than I thought it may have been. But yeah, zoning is our big thing. We had a public hearing Tuesday on the draft zoning ordinance. We had a little over 100 speakers.
That was actually nowhere near that.
Yeah, well, the planning commission has held previous public hearings and it's been going on for so many years. I think a lot of people.
We wore them now.
A lot of people at a lot of avenues have made similar arguments over a period of several years. But this was another public hearing. We're going to have at least one more work session and still hoping to get a zoning ordinance passed before the end of the year. But that's really the major thing. I know in our inclusionary zoning report, they did an analysis of the longevity of affordable housing. One of the conclusions was that period of affordability doesn't really have a big impact for the developer. The AMI is obviously the big one. So our inclusionary zoning, we're at 99 years for affordability, and that was found to be totally financially feasible depending on the AMI level. So if longevity is the goal, that I would maybe that's what
it was. Longevity plus getting deep into the AM.
Yeah. Yeah, well, likewise, I anticipate this budget cycle land acquisition for Charlottesville will be another topic for affordable housing and kind of thinking longer term. Is there a way to have land bank combined with land trust to really get to both homeownership and rental affordability long term? So exciting to hear the similar conversations happening in the county. But that's it, Charles.
Yeah. More or less, I attended that hearing. I still finish out. It was yeah, it was 100. I think it was 100 even. It was 104 people signed up and 4 people told us it towards the end of it. So I think you were exactly 100, maybe 101, something like that. Our own version of that had 100 and wasn't a lot more than that, 14 or 15. I will say that Mayor Snook was savage about enforcing the time limit, which our own chair was more kindly, which a little bit. So we ran a little later than we needed to be. But anyway, and I'm excited to hear about your thinking about the possibility of forward motion on acquiring land, affordable housing. The land bank has been my own particular hobby horse. It's, you know, potatoes, and we're making noise about doing that as well, or at least restarting that conversation. We also had the planning commission first shot at a CIP, and you will be shocked to learn that there's a lot of things we want to do, and there's quite enough money to do it. It's sort of, although it was considerably less brutal than the prior year, we made some enormous commitments to schools. So that's about where we are now, just sort of trying to sled dog through it. So
what were the general sort of nature of the comments you received?
So I to compare and contrast, I think, and Councilor Payne will certainly jump in. They were largely, I think, majority supportive in general. Is that your count too? More for than against by some.
On Tuesday, I would say throughout it, it's probably split relatively close in terms of the comments we received, probably about half and half. I would say there's a camp of people who are broadly in support, saying both increased height and density are critical for affordability. There's a camp of people who just are apprehensive about the speed of change within their neighborhood. And then there's a camp of people who say, you say this will help affordability, we don't believe that it actually will. And then there's probably the smallest camp is probably some folks in neighborhoods like 10th and Page or Fikeville or Rose Hill, who have a skepticism about the proposal overall and have a fear that it's kind of another urban renewal. That's probably the smallest camp, but we had, maybe not in terms of perception, but in terms of people we hear from at public hearings, but there were a couple of those folks that evening as well.
But there's a of the, we don't want our neighborhoods to change, that I think is disproportionately represented vocally. Those folks show up, and some of them, some of the comments that we received, some of them were sort of borderline disturbing in that sense. But you know, and you know, you sort of wonder, you sent me this 1,000-word email, you know, it's forever, right? But so that's sort of what we're dealing with. There's a lot of this anxiety, I said, in general. And a lot of people telling us that we're making this way too complicated. The simple thing to do is X, and more people to figure that out. A lot of this. So,
right. Supervisor Reed?
I'm going to defer to Jesse because he knows what to talk about.
Supervisor Garber?
The best thing we had was on the 20th, we had Christine and David come out and help with that legislative priorities, and they were really well. And as I predicted, when we finished, or the rest of the board actually voted on SDRs, I predicted we had heard the last of them. Well, this week, one of the major subdivisions revisited their HOAs, and now they have disallowed SDRs, which it all started out. My first question, the very first night it was brought to us, that this seems like an HOA issue. And why aren't y'all handling it? If you don't want it, or if you do want it, address it with the HOAs. But, well, we can't enforce it. We don't, you know, we don't county ordinance. So by the time we got through with it, it was so watered down, we have an STR ordinance that virtually says not. And but I thought we kind of funded it this week, one of the main subdivisions. And of course, people were spreading, and that said it was on the hand, and they did. With their notification, everybody else in there, but they passed a new revised HOA that does not allow STRs. And I think we're going to see a whole lot more of it. So I don't think that's going to win.
Yeah. Supervisor O'Brien?
Well, aside from the fact that Jesse was extremely boring, I think, I can't even really want to. We passed a short-term, rental ordinance, very flexible, basically A1, you can do whatever you want to. That standpoint, not very complicated, not restricted. We didn't have one before. We had in our ordinance basically that if you were at a short-term rental, you had to have only X percentage of your house dedicated for it, and the owner had to be on the property. So that's no longer the case. It's more flexible than it used to be. It wasn't being enforced in any way per se, and we didn't really have a mechanism to do it. It had come up about a year and a half ago, where an individual had built a tree house, very nice, elegant tree house operation, and was then confronted by the planning commission, even though they'd gone through all the steps, not the planning commission, planning department, gone through all the steps of making sure that they'd done the applications, and told that they could not rent it out. This didn't fit with the ordinance. At that time, we took the step of saying, well, is this person being singled out? In this case, it's one of the people in the Treasury Department also had a treehouse rental. It was very similar to that. We said until we pass an ordinance, we're not going to enforce it. So now that ordinance is in place, and we're going to have to the HOA. So we had that. We decided we weren't going to let the dogs out. So we've got a leash law now over Pleasant Grove for the majority of the park. But about a third of the park is still leash unleashed friendly. As would be customary, Mr. Fairchild, very anti-growth, said, I guess with people you get these dog issues. It's not cute, Crystal. That's okay. He lamented the fact that we had to do that, but then in terms of kind of the bigger thing that isn't really well, it's come up to the board. The board's going to take a position on it. Is what's going on with Aqua Virginia and their increase in rates. Albemarle has a few people in Aqua Virginia, not very many, but a few. But for those who don't know, Aqua is asking for a rating on 33.8%. They currently have about 2.5 times the rate increase of typical water and sewer individual. Rates in the lake, if you've got both water and sewer, in the $150 plus range. They're asking for a 33.8% increase, which would be about $35 depending on where you stand on that in terms of that, which is close to about half of what everybody else pays. The average, based on the Draper Aiden report of public water systems for rate increases, is 3.8%. So it's pretty fascinating that they are so competitive and effective that they need a 30% increase above everybody else. So needless to say, it's causing some consternation. And there's some talk among counties, and I'm going to be having a drink with Mr. Rutherford over here. I talked a little bit to a good friend over here, and see if I can encourage them to participate in some of the activities that take place. So that's pretty much it going on in Fluvanna County. Again, the lake represents about 50% of the county, so it's a huge deal. That's kind of $7 million or something for rate increase there. That's it.
Yeah. Mr. Herring, any additional items?
Just a few things. We've had some issues with our water authority. Most people in Greene County know that the rates to get simple mathematical equation, start with this water usage, and this water usage be minus an acreage rates, and then what you pay. And then it's not quite as simple as that. So a lot of issues with the bills. We've had individuals get bills of $33,000 and $50,000 for each month. Obviously, they were not happy with those bills. So they are working on those issues. We had a supervisor resign. We replaced that individual on the board with the process there. We went through a process for the reservoir project to get them some product. And that was a very popular meeting. But we had to go through a process to try to expedite because the licensing permitting is coming to an end in so many years. So it's not very popular, nor is it something desirable by the board. And that board is changing quite a bit over starting in January. We will have 2 brand new members. I suspect the direction of the board. 2 brand new members with 1 returning board member who served about 8 to 10 years ago. He's currently on the board replacing Stanford. So I would believe that our board will probably change directions quite a bit. I'm not sure which direction they're going, but it's not the same direction we're going. So hopefully it's in a good direction. So we'll stay positive. So yeah, thank you. Mr. Robin.
So we were gonna have a really calm one, a forgiving one. This usually happens. We already started making motions. 2 motions. Transient occupancy tax, and we're gonna fight over school zone cameras. We picked about as contentious of a December as we could get. So we have we're making Ernie buy the pizza. It's part of the rules this coming meeting. Since we're gonna be stuck in there for 18 hours straight, probably. We're gonna have to move up the time start.
We've already had public hearings on both.
So
now it's just us.
It's just
You're welcome to attend our zoning work session.
And you can make 3 pizzas.
3 pizzas. But no, we just kind of, we have a little bit of, not really a board change. We have a new member coming on in our board, replacing South District Supervisor Mr. Barton. One thing that has really impacted us is the change in the not JLR, sorry, but with the positive index. That's going to have probably $1.2 million impact on our budget. We're speculating, just kind of with that. It was essentially a 0.07 change. It was really rough, really hard. That's to equate that to pennies. That's like 4 or 5 pennies on the real estate side. So it's a huge deal. And this isn't new. This has been happening for years, and it's just a constant now at this point for us as a small locality with only 1,200 students. I mean, we're talking, 10K a student change. It almost feels like. It's an insane situation for us to be in. But we have to figure that out this coming budget session. And other than that, what really fun things we have. Gonna be revisiting some internet stuff, see where we're at. Big deal that we're getting into, and more so Mr. Parr and I, West and East District, are fighting on, is the timeframe of a cell tower approval to the point of its completion. We've had a major issue, and this is serious, like where we've approved towers and they don't get done for 4 or 5 years. It's almost as if we've sold them this economic interest thing that they have approval for, and then they go and they sell whatever entity. And so at Baco, I had a very long, pretty loud conversation with Verizon and a couple other entities over there. I said, guys, we're approving your stuff, or you're using some third party to get these approvals for a tower for you to do it. And we know it's really about you. And 5 years later, we're not getting anything, and all we're doing is lying to our constituents. And one of the things that we started saying, and I think this will just, once we have Firefly everywhere, this will probably be a little bit less of a conversation, but man, start putting timetables on that stuff. Don't not do it. We get it. But the thing is, with cell towers, it's almost as if you just keep going. They do it. Well, they'll do the simple bare minimum just to keep the clock ticking. Oh, it's going to change. Like they have taken advantage of 3 very three particular areas that are in high demand with a very large, much larger population today than 10 years ago. And, you know, what these entities are also doing, they're cutting the deal with the landowner and then they're stuck. No compete clauses and all that stuff. And they got this like, that they can't change. You know, they can't even go to the next guy who's actually willing to complete it yet. So I think we're gonna rework that too, double down some. But that's all I got.
Thank you. We had Gary Wood presenting. He did say that 98 point something percent of the county is now covered. So yeah,
Thank you. Thank you for telling us that.
Yeah, we were 94%.
Yeah,
they're covered, they aren't put up.
okay, covered in with the equipment in your house is the difference.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Glad we were able to actually go around. With that, is there a motion to adjourn?
Second. So we move fast.
All in favor, say aye. We are adjourned. See you on Monday. Happy holidays.